So welcome to Rose Connections. My name is Janet Rose, and I am the owner and former social justice attorney and heart-centered coach who is behind Rose Connections. It's funny, I almost just said Rose Solutions, which was actually a previous business that I owned where I was a mediator. And so I bring that mediation background into what I do right now. And it's interesting because over the last couple of weeks, and I would say actually almost the last month, I've actually been trying to record this video, and every single time I do, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it's the right message. It doesn't feel like it's the right tone. It feels like I'm trying to adhere to some set of expectations that have actually not been communicated to me. So sort of taking a page out of my own book and decided to just kind of sit with that and why this was so difficult for me. And the topic today is actually about trauma-informed social change and why it's so important to me as a professional and as a person, but also why I chose to build my entire business out of that altogether. So I'm trying something a little bit different today, and instead of, I think I've recorded a few of these where it was more like a presentation, like here are the principles of trauma-informed care, and here are the reasons why it matters, and here's why you should care. And while that is, I think, a really useful presentation to give at some point in the future, that's not what this is for, and that's not really the way I want to introduce it to you. So the way I want to introduce what trauma-informed social change really means to me and why it matters, I need to build in some of my own story into this, and I need to share some of what's happening out in the world and what I have witnessed in my professional work and in my personal life that influences this vision and hopefully will align with some of what you want to create in your world. So just to start off, what is trauma-informed social change? I get that question a lot, and I love it because it means that we're having this conversation. Trauma-informed care. So let's just start there. Trauma-informed care is a modality. It's a set of principles and practices and priorities that I think were developed originally by SAMHSA, or at least have promoted primarily by SAMHSA. So SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Sorry, I always want to say agency, but it's administration. And so they look at how to integrate these ideas of, at its core, that the folks that we are working with, the folks that are facing, who are the most vulnerable out there right now, likely are carrying stories of trauma, likely are carrying trauma in their bodies, and likely are kind of making their decisions based on how those trauma reactions are making them feel. And so at its core, trauma-informed care is just a simple acknowledgement that, oh my gosh, there's a lot of trauma out in the world, and maybe we as an organization, maybe we as professionals, maybe we as individuals should have our radar on for that a little bit and shift our behavior just slightly so that we can meet people where they are. Because if we're constantly applying a one-size-fits-all approach to people, we're not really seeing them as whole individuals. We're not really acknowledging the realities that they have to live under. We're just saying you have to follow the rules and that's it. And a really great example of that is our human services and public benefit systems. I worked specifically with Social Security disability, and while I was trained in trauma-informed care as a mediator, it really, really became so super apparent to me when I was working with Social Security disability applications. I would ask a simple question like, tell me the names of the doctors that you've been to in the last 5 years. And for someone who has been through a lot of medical trauma and might actually be very resentful and angry at those doctors. For someone who is going through active PTSD and it's affecting how their memory is processing some of those things, they are also perhaps traumatized by being in front of an attorney and thinking that they're being scrutinized and that they're going to be invalidated at the end of that. So all of this kind of builds up this very perfect storm for me as the professional to not get any answers. And in fact, I do have people who will break down crying just with that question alone. What doctors have you seen in the last 5 years? Because it's so overwhelming to them. So instead, I'll just walk it back. Me as a professional, I have the ability to adjust to the person who is sitting across the table from me. And so when I would have those conversations with them, I would then start taking that trauma into consideration, and I would introduce the question differently, just based off of the conversations I was getting from them. Like, you got to a point, you were doing enough of this work that you understood what to expect. You understood certain signals and signs that someone was really overwhelmed and agitated. And that overwhelm will then take over the brain and shut it down or make it focus on only one thing. These are normal trauma responses. These are things that happen to us. And these are things that happen when our body is overwhelmed and loses that ability to cope. And so it's that toxic level of stress that impacts the body's ability to cope. And when I learned about trauma-informed care, and then when I started seeing it and using it in my practice, I noticed significant differences. Now, in Colorado, at the time, the average approval rate for a Social Security disability application was somewhere in the mid-20s or 30%. In my first year there, I maintained an average of about 70% approval rate. And part of that was not just because I was actually good at screening some of these cases, but because I was good at getting information out of people for these cases. I took things at their own pace. I made adjustments wherever I could, because they're the ones carrying that burden. They're the ones carrying that trauma. They're the ones whose bodies are freaking out and saying, no, this is not safe for me. So I, the professional, have an obligation, or rather an opportunity, to make it a safe space for them. So in that whole experience, I learned very well how deeply that trauma impacts us. And I also learned through doing that work, I started reliving some of my own trauma. So I was being re-traumatized at the same time that I was providing these really great trauma-informed environments for my clients, or at least trying to. And my own re-traumatization, as well as listening to some of the most vulnerable people in our state sharing their life stories with me, and not one of them did not, I think out of 450 people that I interviewed over the course of 5-6 years, there were only a handful of them, maybe 5 of them, who did not have trauma in their backgrounds on some level or another. And so that was a huge lesson to me. But me as the worker, I was also seeing how that vicarious trauma of hearing the struggles and the near-death experiences that these people have had and are still having it on a daily level, how that impacted me as a professional. And so as I got further in my career, as I got into a senior management position, and I got into a place where I could address burnout on a more systemic or departmental level, it became very obvious to me that all of us had these deficits of trauma, and that it's happening so consistently across our nation and across our world. And there's some statistics out there, anywhere between 70 and 80% of adults report that they have survived at least one traumatic event. And it really depends on how you define that trauma and how those people define trauma. Those are other lessons that we'll get to some other day. But today I just wanted to talk about how I envisioned and how that came to me and how that became such a big part of the work that I was doing. I simply found that when we treat people with the respect and with, you know, enough room for them to have some control over their lives, we move forward better and easier together, and we uplift each other together when we're in that space and we recognize and we acknowledge the suffering that is happening across the room from us. And so that is something that I want to see embedded in our laws. I'm a lawyer, or I just went on inactive status, so I'm kind of a former lawyer. And I see it happen all the time in our legal systems too. And I see it when, you know, for example, a kid, you know, a great example actually is the girl who was punished by being put into detention for not showing up to her remote classes on time. That was such, I'll put a link to it in the description below, to that story if you're unfamiliar. But to me, that was actually a really wonderful opportunity that we could have used in the legal system to be more trauma informed. You know, this girl had been through a lot. Her mom had been through a lot. Her mom was desperate for help. And putting the kid into detention is not helping the kid. There are so many studies about that prison or that school to prison pipeline, and that little girl was definitely in that pipeline. Not to mention the fact that she also had a learning disability, and she had difficulty processing and showing up on time. These are things inherent in her disability, and she was basically being punished as if she was doing all of this on purpose. And we have got to start, as a people, start dialing back this idea that people do things to us on purpose. Yeah, there are times that people do stupid things. We all do, but I firmly believe that in most of us, we are trying to do things with the limited information, resources, energy, and self-confidence that we have. You know, there are a number of times that I could have, quote, done the right thing, but that would have required a lot more self-confidence from me than I had at the time. And so sometimes I would do the thing that would keep me small and that would keep me locked up in my trauma, because that, for me, at that moment, was the safest option for me. And one of the things that I posted this on Instagram earlier today, but one of the things that one of my former clients once said is that if I'm not feeling safe in a situation, 90% of my effort is going to go toward whatever it takes to keep me safe. So if I miss out on details on how to check my blood pressure or my blood sugar, if I miss out on details about what time I need to go to this next appointment or whatever else, it's because most of my effort is just trying not to run out the door. And I thought that was such a poignant conversation to have. And so that was something that I then started really integrating into everything that I was doing. And it's not that hard to do. It's not that hard for us to make some adjustments and say, you know what? It's kind of traumatic to tell someone that you have only 10 days to apply for Social Security disability, because it can take that long to even just get this signature signed, to you might have to wait in the lobby for 4 or 5 hours. You just don't know. So these were things that we actually, there was a state program that we had, the state Aid to Needy and Disabled program. And we recognized the incongruencies and the misalignment between this program, which was meant to help people as they're waiting on a Social Security disability application, and the disability application process itself and what was required. And when you have incongruencies like that, when one thing does not line up with the other, but they depend on each other, you're going to create systemic problems at that point. And so what we did is we realigned those two systems together so that you apply for this, it gives you a reasonable amount of time to finish this piece so that you get that $200 a month to be able to live on, so that you have bus money to go to your doctor. So all of those things are, when I was working in the nonprofit world, when I was working in the human services world, this trauma-informed care, it should be our bread and butter. But one of the things I've also noticed is that it's often not. There have actually been, even this week, I had a professional tell me, well, if we're going to be trauma informed about this, we've got to do this. And essentially completely ignoring the actual direct trauma that was being communicated to her in favor of using trauma informed care to burrow into her own really biased viewpoint. That's my view. And yeah, I can be biased too about it. And trauma-informed care actually requires us to take a step back and have some cultural humility. If someone is telling you, hey, this is offensive to me, or hey, this is a microaggression, or this really hurts when you say this, what we should do as individuals, as professionals, and as community members is believe them. At a very simple core part of what we do as human beings, when someone tells us that they're hurt, and it's okay to acknowledge that they're hurt, and it's okay to make some adjustments along the way for that hurt. If I told you today that my father died yesterday and I needed a little bit of extra time on this assignment, I'm pretty sure you would give me extra time on that, correct? But if I just had a really terse, horrible conversation with an ex who's been stalking me, that might not be viewed as a good enough excuse to give someone an extension. So, and I'm not advocating that we lift all the rules and we don't have expectations for people, but I do say that, what someone is going through in their own life and what they are being asked to do by a system or by an organization or by a partner or by a family member should have some better alignment, is what I'm asking. And so trauma-informed social change is actually taking this trauma-informed care viewpoint out of just the human services or mental health worlds and dropping it into our public discourse about politics. I can't even tell you the number of triggery ads there are out there for various candidates and causes. But we also embed it into our public policy, and this goes directly toward Black Lives Matter and defunding the police. We have a whole group of people saying, this practice hurts us. We wanted to work with you guys. We've been asking you for, at least the entire time I've been in politics, I've been hearing this conversation. And only now, when we've reached such a critical mass and such a critical an obvious national disproportionate amount of people who are being killed, punished, and incarcerated for things that are unequal to other people, this creates an imbalance. This creates a problem. And this is actually the problem that we're seeing right now throughout everywhere. Is we're seeing these systems that have been built up on inequality and systems of control that are starting to break apart. And my vision is that the more that we embed a recognition, just a simple recognition, an acknowledgement of someone else's suffering, someone else's trauma into the various areas of our life, not only just in our public life, but in our intimate partnerships, especially our intimate partnerships, our families, as well as we as individuals. How many people are carrying around traumatic reactions to something that they refuse to acknowledge was traumatic for them? Oh yeah, I got into that car accident, even though, I brace up whenever I'm driving and I can't let go of control in order to be able to drive. Yeah, that wasn't a problem for me. I totally got over that. I hear that all the time, and I'm just sort of like, if it's impacting your life, if it's adversely impacting your life like that, guess what? It was trauma. Because it doesn't matter what you went through. It doesn't matter whether, you and your brother went through the same car accident. you guys are different people and you guys are going to have different reactions to it. And those reactions are totally normal and totally okay. But so often in our world, we shut down that vulnerability of recognizing and understanding what our own bodies are trying to tell us in favor of, putting on a brave face and, gritting your teeth and, no crying and all of these other things. And that's what I'm here to do, is start eliminating those cultural messages. And those cultural messages, like I said, are embedded in our laws. They are embedded in our legal systems. And just take a look at how, for example, victims of rape are treated by both the police and prosecutors, and especially defense attorneys. So we as a people can be more responsible, more aware, more heart-centered in recognizing and connecting to one another, recognizing that the trauma that we have felt in ourselves, oh my God, that person across from you who is treating you like shit, they probably have been as well. And I'm not saying that it provides an excuse. I do say that it provides us with context, and it provides us with information that we can do, that we can use to design better systems and to design better relationships and to design a better authenticity for ourselves. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that made sense to you. If you have questions, please put them in the comments below. I will try to check those and answer those. And as always, you can always find me on Instagram at sharpsweetbella. I also have a personal blog, sharpsweetbella.com, and you can find me, sharpsweetbella, on Twitter as well. But if you want to book me for a training or sign up for some leadership coaching, then rose-connections.com. You can also find me there. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I really appreciate your support and the time that we spend together. So I will see you soon with another video.